Okay, so for this particular thing, what we're going to do now is we're going to look at another method for solving. Right now, you guys have graphing method, you guys have square root method, and you guys have factoring method. There are a couple other methods that we can use to solve quadratics, and that's one of the methods I'm going to teach you today. Okay, so just so that you guys know, that's what we're going to do. All right? Now, a couple things. The first thing, though, is if I give you a problem that looks like this, x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 36. And what I'm going to want you to do with that problem is I want you to solve it using square roots. Now, that is exactly what we did 2 days ago, or not 2 days ago, but 2 sections ago. The only difference is it's not in square root format yet. So the first thing that I want you to do when it's like this is I want you to take the side that has the variables and factor it. What times what gives me x squared? X times x. What times what gives me 4 but adds up to be 4? 2 and 2, I heard Jordan say. Now what I want you to notice is it the same group twice? In the parentheses, it's the exact same thing. So instead of listing it like that, why not list it like this? X plus 2 squared equals 36. Is there a difference in the way I write it? No, but for this particular problem, yes. And the reason why is because now it's in the same format that you had a couple questions like that from 3-1. How do I get rid of square root? Or square, I mean. I square root it. When I square root the square on the left-hand side, what comes out?
Plus or minus 6.
No, on the left-hand side.
Oh, x plus 2.
X plus 2. On the right-hand side, what's the square root of 36?
Plus or minus 6.
Plus or minus 6. Don't forget the plus and minus. For those of you who just said 6, you forgot the plus and minus, and you'd be half right. Okay? Now, for the rest of this, how do I keep going? How do I solve for x? Subtract 2. Now, last hour I had some people asking me, can I leave it like this? Negative 2 plus or minus 6. The answer is no. If it does not have a square root in it, like if all the numbers cancel out, you have to do it 2 separate times. You have to do negative 2 plus 6, which is how much? 4. And then you have to do negative 2 minus 6, which is what? Negative 8. So my 2 answers are 4 and negative 8. The first third of your assignment is going to be this. This is what you have to do. Every single one of the ones that are on the left-hand side will factor, and every single one of them on the left-hand side will be the same group twice. Okay? Just throwing that out there. What do you think of that part so far? Do you want to do another one like that? Yeah? Let's go x squared minus 22x plus 121 equals 81. First thing that I want you to do, I want you to factor the side that's got the variables. What times what gives me x squared? What times what gives me 121 but adds up to be negative 22? I almost said the answer. Can I just put negative x minus 11 and then put a squared on it? It is going to be the same group twice for every single one of those first set. So it's okay if you guys, when you factor it, that you just put one group and then put a squared up there. That's okay. That's actually what I want you to do. Then from here, how do I get rid of square? When I square root that left-hand side, I get x minus 11. On the right-hand side, what's the square root of 81?
Plus or minus 9.
Plus or minus 9. Don't forget the plus or minus. Then how do I get rid of the 11? Add 11. Now again, because it came out as no square root left over, I take it as two different things. What's 9 plus 11? 20. Then what's negative 9 plus 11? 2. So my answers are x equals 20 and x equals 2. Yes, Emma?
Why do you have to have the 2 answers?
Because there's two things. There's always a plus and minus. Now, here's what I've seen people been doing. Some people have been doing this where they say x equals plus or minus 20. That's not right. Because negative 9 plus 11 is not negative 20. Okay, so be careful. So when you have the two answers, and the reason why you have to have the two answers, Emma, also is because the plus or minus makes it have two different things. Okay, one's a positive, then one's a negative. It's almost like if you were to set it up as 9 plus 11 and negative 9 plus 11. If you want to set it up as two separate to know. Okay? How are you guys doing? Are you comfortable with this now? Didn't seem too bad? Okay, good. Now, what I'm going to show you next is I'm going to show you the process or the steps it takes to use the new format, the new method of solving these quadratics. Okay? This isn't in your book. This isn't in my college algebra book I teach out of. They only give you one part of it. They don't talk about the entire thing. So I've put together these steps. This is how you have to solve them. We're going to do the rest of the assignment every time by these steps I'm going to give you. The method that we're going to use is called completing the square. Now, when I say completing the square, way back in ancient Greek times, when they say completing the square, they meant they had a square and they needed to complete it. Like a square piece of material and they needed to complete it. They were missing a section. That's what they were referring to. Just like when you talked about the Pythagorean theorem last year in geometry, when it said a squared, they were squaring off the side of a. B squared, they were making a square. And then they took that plus that and made it equal to c squared. Way back in ancient Greek times, that's what they had. So when we complete the square, the first step that should happen is your a should equal 1. If not, make it. Okay? Now, what number am I referring to when I talk about a? Do you guys remember?
X squared.
It's the number in front of x squared. The number in front of x squared needs to be a 1. If it's not a 1, you need to make it. And in order to make it, divide everything by whatever number is in the a. So if it says 5x squared, you divide everything by 5. If it says 2x squared, you divide everything by 2. And then you start. If it just says x squared, we're good to go. So that's the first step. The second step is you move the constant, or the c, to the other side. Okay, which letter is the c? In our quadratic stuff, which one's the c? The last one, usually the one without the letter. Yeah. So whatever number is without the letter, that's also known as the constant, and that's the one where we move it to the other side. By moving it, you're either simply going to add it or subtract it over. That's it. Okay? Is everybody okay with these two steps so far? Third step, this is where the whole heart of the problem lies. This third step is the most crucial to getting right. If you don't get the third step right, you're going to be wrong for the rest of the problem. So be very careful with it. But what you do is you take whatever number's in the B slot, divide it by 2, and then square it to both sides. What is the B position? What number is where the B is at? Do you remember? The middle, or the one in front of the x. Not the x squared, but the x. So I take that number, I divide it by 2, and then I square it. And then I put it into both sides, because what I do to the left side, you do to the right side. Okay? You can't just not do it to both sides. You can't do it to one side or the other. It's not fair. Then the fourth step, you already know, because we just did 2 problems like it. The fourth step is going to be factor the variable side add the number side. And what I mean by the number side is that you'll have 2 numbers on the right-hand side, for instance. You just simply add those together, whatever that happens to be. Okay? The fifth step, after we factored it, we're going to square root both sides. And the sixth step is we're going to solve for x. Those are the 6 steps you need to take in order to complete the square. Okay? So everybody got the steps down? All right. So here's what the problems are going to look like. It'll look something like this. X squared minus 10x plus 7 equals 0. And when I look at that problem, it is very similar to what we did in section 1. Because it is the same type of questions. The only difference is now I can't use square rooting because there's an extra x in there. I can't use factoring. Do you know why? Because if you try, what gives me 7? 7 to 1. Does that make 10? No. Factoring does not work. I could graph it, but if I graph it, it's going to come out as decimal answers. And I don't want that. I want exact answers. So, using the completing the square method, go through the steps with me. What was the first step? No, it wasn't. What's the first step? Is A1. Yes, it's a great steak sauce too, by the way. But if is A1, this is the A position. It's AX squared plus BX plus C. Is A1. Yes. Step 1 is done for us already. Step 2, move the constant or the C to the other side. Now, before you start writing, watch for a second. I'll give you time, but I want you to watch what I do. X squared minus 10x equals negative 7. Did anybody notice what I did? Well, I subtracted 7, yes, but did you know what I physically did with the problem? Do you see what I left a big space. Right. That is exactly what I did. Where that 7 was, I left a big giant space. Why? Because I'm going to fill that space now, step 3. Step 3 said what? Okay. Jake, what's in B? Good. So negative 10 divided by 2 squared. You got to divide first. What's negative 10 divided by 2? What's negative 5 squared? I'm going to stick a 25 into both sides. So in that big giant gap or space that I left that Nicole mentioned, I'm going to put a plus 25. And if I put something on the left side, I have to put something on the right side. So I have to put a plus 25 over here too. Are you comfortable with step 3? If you screw that part up, you are going to be wrong from here on out. So you got to be careful with that one. It's not that hard once you look at it. But at the same time, if you mess up the number, you're wrong. Now, I want you to factor this side. What times what gives me x squared? What times what gives me 25 but adds it to be negative 10? Now, do you notice where when I wrote it as two groups, it was the same group twice? Do you remember on the first two where I said, hey, I want you to write it as one group squared rather than two groups? Do you remember me saying that? Good. That's the factor side. Now the other side means add those two numbers together. What's negative 7 plus 25? 18. What was step 5? Square root both sides. What's the square root of x minus 5 squared? X minus 5. On the right-hand side, what's the square root of 18? It's not a perfect square this time. So over here on my scratched piece of paper, can I break it down? Work it, work it. So if I break it down, I got 2 3's, so I heard Colton say plus or minus 3 root 2. Do not forget the plus or minus. If you do, it's wrong. Okay? So be careful with that. Are you comfortable with how he put 3 root 2? I am. It looked great. Proud of him. So then what's the 6th step? How do I do that? Add 5. Now, can you add 5 into a plus or minus 3 root 2? No. When it's got 3 root 2, when it doesn't come out evenly, when it's not a perfect square like those other ones were, you got to leave it as is. So my answer is 5 plus or minus 3 root 2. Done. What do you think of the completing the square method? If you go and follow the steps, you won't have it wrong. Now, can I share you a little secret, but don't tell too many people? What number was it that we got when I asked you what times what gives me 25 but added up to be negative 10? I circled it in blue. You got negative 5. Is there a negative 5 besides this step here? Is there a negative 5 anywhere else on the screen? It's right here. Do you see that also, that's negative 5? That's not a coincidence. The number before you square it is always the number that goes into the x squared part. Every time. Those two numbers are always the same. Okay? Just so you know. Those two numbers will always be the same. Now, let's do one where A is not 1. Thanks, Kristen. I appreciate you. Okay, let's go through the process together. Is A 1? No. If you need to make it, you divide everything by whatever is in the A slot. What number is in the A position? So I divide everything by 3. Now, here's the problem that you guys haven't seen yet, and you pretty much won't see just yet. I'm dividing this for you without asking, sorry. But one of the things that I want to make sure that you guys are aware of, when I divide everything by 3, for instance, what if that middle number would have been a 13 and not a 12? Then your B would have been 13/3. Not so user-friendly, right? When there's fractions involved. Nice thing is today, I don't think any of them will be. I think they'll all divide nicely for you, if they have to, okay? So, what was second step? Which one's C? How do I move it? I subtract it. But leave a space. Step 2, done. Step 3. What's step 3? B over 2 squared. What number's in the B? B4 what? No. Sorry. I know it's early yet. What's 4 divided by 2? What's 2 squared? So I'm going to add 4 here, and I'm going to add 4 there. So whatever number you get out, you have to put it into both sides. If you just put it into one side, you're wrong. Equations are like balance scales where they should balance. If they don't balance, then you're not making it right. Step 4 said factor. What times what gives me 4 but adds up to be 4? 2. Now, remember what I just said about that last one, that little secret tip? When I asked what times what gives me 4 but adds up to be 4, you said the number 2. Is the number 2 somewhere else on that screen? It's right here. That number and the 2 that's inside the parentheses are always going to be the same number every time. So why am I making that a point of emphasis? Because when you have fractions, it's easier then, if that were the case. On the right-hand side, what's negative 5 plus 4? Negative 1. Now, how do I get rid of square? Square root it. And when I do that, I get x plus 2 on the left side. What do I get on the right side? No. Plus or minus I. Okay, now I also heard somebody say plus or minus I the square root of 1. But what is the square root of 1? 1. Right? The square root of 1 is just 1. So that's really me saying 1i. Okay? So when Nicole said plus or minus I root 1, she wasn't wrong. Just remember to simplify the square root if you can. And that's 1. Now, Colton, to get back to what you said. Colton said no solution. If the directions say find all real solutions, Colton, you would have been right. Because that's not real. But the directions are going to say solve. It doesn't specify real. So, not so much in this book, but when you get to college, one section will say find all real solutions, and the next section will say find all solutions. Notice the difference? This would be no solution. This would be I's. So you got to be careful. But we're just saying solve, so it doesn't have any notation there, so I is in play. Especially now that we've talked about it. All right, how do you get x by itself now? Minus 2. And so x equals negative 2 plus or minus I. And I'm done. So what do you think of this completing the square stuff? If you follow the steps, it's foolproof. But again, if you look for the steps in your book, you ain't going to find them. So if you look on page 116, I want to walk you through the directions real fast. The first set of directions says, on 3 through 10, solve the equation using square roots. Check your solutions. 3 through 10 is like the first 2 that I did before I completed the square. So all you have to do on 3 through 10 is factor the left-hand side, then you'll square root both sides and solve for x. Okay? Then on 11 through 20, it says find the value of c that makes the expression a perfect square. This is number 11. So what they want you to do here is they want you to go through the b divided by 2 process. What number is in the b position? 10. What's 10 divided by 2? 5. What's 5 squared? 25. So what number should be in the c position? 25. Then it goes on to say, then write the expression as a square of a binomial, which is a big fancy words for factor it. What times what gives me x squared? What times what gives me 25 but adds up to be 10? Remember, this number and this number are always the same. So on 11 through 20, that's what they're asking you to do. There's no solving because there's no equal sign. They just want to know what number belongs in the c position and then factor it. Then 25 to 36 says solve the equation by completing the square. Notice the directions. It just says solve. It does not say find real solutions. So I is in play. Do you want to do another square root?
Yeah. Franklin Erickson?
Okay. Anybody else, or is everybody all right with how we do the last ones? Okay. So on page 116, we're 3 to 36 multiples of 3.